This morning, what I'd like to do is share with you, and part of it's going to be interactive, which means I'll ask you to, for example, one point I'm going to talk about some of the different states. And if you have a particular state that interests you, I'm going to ask you to let me know, and I will read, for example, that particular state's preamble to their constitution. You might be curious to know what a particular state, how they view God. And you may be a particular president you're interested in. I've got all the inaugural addresses from different presidents from the beginning to all the way through George W. Bush. And if there's a particular president, you won't be thinking about that, and you call it out at the appropriate time, and I'll read you portions of what they happen to say. Proverbs 14:34 says, "Righteousness exalts a nation, but sin is reproach to any people." If you are, I am 53, I'll be 54 this summer. If you are younger than I am, it is an absolute guarantee that unless you went to a private Christian school, you were taught a secularized version of American history. And I remember being up through the third grade. Now, I'm not that old. I remember being up through the third grade. There would be a reading from the passage of Scripture, and I went to public schools. They'd be saying the Lord's Prayer, and then we'd have a time of prayer. And that was every day in the public schools. But in 1963, when I was in the third grade, in the middle of that year, it stopped. Of course, you don't understand what happened, but in 1963 was some of the decisions that began to turn, allowing prayer and things and Bible reading in the public schools. And so, as I began to do some of the research for this message, I want to be honest with you and tell you that I'm going to do nothing more than skim lightly across the top. When I preach to you on Sunday mornings, an average of 40 to 45 minutes, I have 3 pages of notes. This morning I have 57. That gives you an idea. And this is just skimming across the top. And if anybody, and whether listening by way of internet, if anybody would like to have my entire 57 pages of notes, if you just let me know, I'll be happy to email them to you, and you can have them. And I'll email them as a Word document. We've just celebrated the birthday of our nation, our independence from England. It's an incredible feat when you stop to think about it. A small band of 13 colonies agreed to take on the most powerful nation on the earth. We forget about that sometimes. England was the most powerful nation on earth at the time. They said that the sun never set on the British Empire. And a group of ragtag 13 colonies banded together to say enough's enough, and we're going to set out and we're going to create a new nation. When the signers of the Declaration of Independence placed their names on that document, they were potentially signing their very own death warrant, because should they not be successful, they would most certainly have been hunted down and executed by the British Empire. You know, when we begin to, and that's why it's so important to look at what these men stood for and what were their thinking when they did this. Because whatever it was, they were willing to die. When someone's willing to die for a belief, it's worthy to look into what those beliefs were, because they were at the foundation of this nation. Today, you know, we look at the America that was created in 1776. That's what I want to do for you this morning. I want to portray to you the type of America that existed in the 1700s. I'm not going to pretend to you and say to you that we're the same country today that we were back then. What I want to do is give you a sense of what it would have been like to have been back then. It was in a Christian America. Christianity was woven into every fiber of our government and our nation. Our progression. You know, I talked about when I was up to the third grade having Bible reading and prayer, how far we've come. I should say, how far we've descended. In the year 2003, there was a man by the name of Judge Roy Moore. Some of you may be familiar with what took place with Judge Moore. Judge Moore actually was elected to the Chief Justice of the Alabama Supreme Court. That was an elected position, which is quite interesting when you think about it. Most judges are it comes up through the system, and the legislators kind of appoint judges. But in Alabama, they're actually voted. And here was a man that was a strong Christian and was elected by the people to the chief judge of the Alabama Supreme Court. And then he decided at his own expense, at no expense to the government, to bring in a monument to the Ten Commandments, because he believed the Ten Commandments were the foundation of American law. You know, remember those Ten Commandments, thou shalt not kill, thou shalt not covet, those, thou shalt have no God before me, those little things we all kind of learn as children. And he was ordered by the federal court to remove that monument from the judicial building. Now, mind you, this monument didn't have any flashing lights to it. You didn't have to read it. It was just there. And he placed it there, but what made what Judge Moore did so unique is he said, I'm putting it here because it's God's law and it's a basis and a foundation of our judicial system, and I think it's appropriate to be here. Not only did our federal court find that to be a violation of the First Amendment Establishment Clause, and I'll go into that in just a moment what that is, they ordered the monument removed. And I've seen pictures of them removing the monument. It was interesting. There were people that were handicapped sitting in wheelchairs being arrested because these handicapped people would sit around the monument and didn't want it to be taken out. And the government actually arrested little old ladies confined to wheelchairs because they dared to block that monument. And it was interesting after that is Judge Roy Moore, for his troubles, the Judiciary Disciplinary Board had him removed as Chief Justice of the Supreme Court of Alabama. Not only did the Ten Commandments leave, but he lost his elected position in an unheard of move. Folks, that tells you how far we have come as a nation, how far we have descended. I want to give you what the current law is before I give you the history. The current law today is found in what they refer to as the Lemon Test. Funny little name. Many times a legal test is given because of the names of one of the litigants in the particular case where that law is adopted. In this case, it was a man named Lemon. And for something to be allowed in our government today or to be supported in our public school system or anything such as that where the government is involved, the government's action has to pass this three-pronged test. Number one, whatever it is that we're putting forth has to have a secular purpose. In other words, if I can show the Ten Commandments to be a secular purpose, merely historical, for example, that's okay, but we can't mention God. Second, that test shows that the government's action must not have the primary effect of either advancing or inhibiting religion. And finally, the government's action in putting forth that monument or whatever it is must not result in, quote, an excessive governmental entanglement with religion. So let's get that straight. What that means is this. If you want to have something that involves a religious nature, the mention of God in our society now, it has to be for a secular purpose. Talk about an oxymoron. Talk about something, how far we have fallen. As we look at some of our founders this morning and the things they said, you ponder yourself and think about, would what the law is today, does it reflect what these men put together in 1776? Well, let me give you just a brief background. There are three documents that we need to briefly just make sure you're aware of. The first one is called the Declaration of Independence. This is the one we celebrate on July 4th, 1776. Interestingly enough, it was actually July 2nd that the vote was taken to declare independence, but it wasn't approved by Congress until July 4th, which is why that we celebrate July 4th as the birthday of our nation. This document was written primarily by Thomas Jefferson. We're going to hear a little bit about Mr. Jefferson and some of the things that he wrote and said because he's really come under a lot of attack by modern secular historians. But some of you may be familiar with the Declaration of Independence because it says, quote, we hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal, that they are endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights, that among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. Most of you have heard those phraseologies before. And what's interesting is that Jefferson, when he wrote that, he was establishing or believing in what's referred to as natural law. There are certain things that these men believed was natural law, and natural law came from God. Natural law did not come from the thinking of man or the creation of man. Natural law came specifically from God. And this is what the Declaration of Independence was making reference to, that there were certain truths, that men were created equal. We were not to be subservient to England, who began to take away certain rights that we had. We had something we had received from God, and that was the basis of the Declaration of Independence. The second document is referred to as the United States Constitution. This document was actually adopted on September 17th, 1787, at the Constitutional Convention in Philadelphia, and it was ratified by the people in the name of the people. It's been amended 27 times. It's called the Supreme Law of our land, and most may be familiar with the phraseology of that document that says, we, the people of the United States, in order to form a more perfect union, establish justice, ensure domestic tranquility, provide for the common defense, and promote the general welfare, and secure the blessings of liberty to ourselves and our posterity, do ordain and establish this Constitution for the United States of America. So we have the Declaration of Independence declaring our freedom. The Constitution is the supreme law of the land. But then we have something called the Bill of Rights, which was a separate document, and it is the first Bill of Rights that we will specifically focus in on. The Bill of Rights, and especially the First Amendment, they were introduced by James Madison. They were ratified by the people. And this is what James Madison originally proposed a First Amendment to say the following. Well, actually, I'll get to that in a little minute. Let me get it. I'll read it to you as it stands today, and then I'll get to you a little bit later what he actually said. The First Amendment reads as